Hello, everybody. Welcome to Worst Case Macchiato. It is episode 16. And I don't know.
Is it episode 16? I thought it was episode 15.
We'll figure
Or is
it
it
out.
14?
I'll figure it out eventually. One of these days I'll remember what the actual episode number is.
Let's see.
No, because it's 16 because I broke up the last two. Because even with the case that you did last time, it was still 1 hour and 20 minutes by itself.
Yep, my bad.
So no, but like my case was an hour in itself too. So like,
no, I meant like I thought honestly, my bad for not knowing that it was
broken up.
Episode 16.
Yeah, it was a last minute decision for me to split it up. So like. Because I opened the recording, it was 2.5 hours. I'm like, oh my god. Like, there's no way that's gonna be one episode. So I split it into two.
1 second.
It's all good.
Just like trying to move you over. I'm also trying to do this while not freezing because it is freezing in our house because our new furnace that they put in is already done.
It's already done?
It literally lasted 24 hours.
What do you guys do now?
So right now we have no heat and we're living on space heaters. So like the house was not warm when I got home. So Dad was like, Mom's not going to be home till 8. And then like he won't be home till later than that. Like he probably won't be home till like 10:30, 11.
Right, so obviously it wasn't on when they were gone.
No, like the space heaters weren't running when they were gone, so poor Mika. And then obviously like the basement hasn't been run because I've been home all week because I've been working nights.
Right.
So yeah, I've been living on the fire, like with the fireplace on down here when I am home usually, and then like curled up in blankets and sweaters and stuff.
Jeez.
Because, like, he bought this furnace used from somebody from his work that had it as, like, an extra. And he literally only used it, like, twice in 10 years. Like, it's only 10 years old. But literally 24 hours in, and not even 24 hours in, and it blew the motor. So, now it needs a motor, and now my parents have to save to buy a motor for it.
Oh my god.
Or have it all taken out and just switch to baseboard heaters like Nanny's. So, I don't know what they're doing yet or what their plan is, but right now we're living off $20 space heaters that we bought last year in case of like power outages in the winter that we could like run those to the generator. Did not expect to be heating our entire house on that because we have no furnace.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and I popped a breaker down here yesterday because I had the TV on. The TV was on, the light was on. Turned the fireplace on, and something else was on down here, and it popped a breaker. So I'm like, this is awesome.
Wow, I love that. Right? Yeah, I love that for you, for sure.
Yeah. So, anyways, it is what it is, and we're surviving. And hopefully, we get heat soon.
Oh my god.
That's all I gotta say.
Oh my god, that sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, it's not fun.
But so
whenever you are.
Yeah, so my case today, I'm talking about the New York mafia scene in the 1950s.
Interesting.
Honestly, don't know why I was so inclined to do organized crime this week, but I was really looking up organized crime cases. So this is what I've landed on. In the mid-1900s, there were 5 main families of the Italian American mafia that operated in the New York City. So starting in 1931, the 5 families were organized by Salvatore Marinaz. Oh my gosh, if I could say his name properly. Okay. I was really doing my research and I was like, okay, I know this name, I got it down. And then now that I'm looking at my notes, I can't pronounce it.
You can't do it.
Yeah.
That's fair. Sorry, I'm like dodging calls. Your sister keeps spam calling me.
Literally, she called me at like 4 o'clock because she just like, me and management were supposed to call, And then she didn't call me, and I called her and she didn't answer, but she should be driving. She was like asking me, like, she called me because she's just like, Madison's not answering.
Well, she called me, like, cause she calls me like on her way to volleyball, and I'm usually on my way to hockey. We both played at 4 o'clock today. So I was like, okay, and then she's like, well, I'm leaving here at 3:30. I'll call you. Or she's like, I'm leaving at like 3:20 or something. Like, I'll call you then, or 3:30, whatever. And I was like, I literally go get dressed for hockey at like 3:30. And I'm in the middle of nowhere, so I have no service. Like, once I get there, I have like no service. So I'm like, I literally can chat for like 10 minutes then. And then for whatever reason, I had no service there tonight at all. So I didn't like, I couldn't answer her calls because I had no service. Like, it literally had SOS at the top.
Yeah, well, it was just, I think it was like the weirdest part was the fact that like I got, like, I don't know if you opened our Snapchat thing when you were up there or whatever.
So I tried to, and I tried to answer, but then it literally was like light gray and it like wasn't going through on my end. So I'm like, okay, well, this isn't like, I'm in SOS. Like, it's probably not going to send, but I'm like, when I'm driving back, she'll get it.
I didn't even get the Snapchat. But
oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
See, it tells you I have like in the middle of nowhere.
But it told me that you were typing to me, but I never got a message. So like when she called me, I was like, well, she was typing, and then I just never got a message. But like other than that, like I haven't talked to her since like 11 a.m. like, yeah. But anyway, let me try to pronounce this name this time. So in 1931, the 5 families were organized by Salvatore Maranzano, which I'll have a fun time pronouncing his name for the next 10 minutes. Following his victory in the Costella Marazzi War, and Maranzano reorganized the Italian-American gangs in New York City into the Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese families. And each family had their own territory, and they were organizationally structured hierarchies, and so they all reported to the same overarching governing entity, which was called like the Capo dei Capi, which just means boss of all bosses. And this person was Maranzano. So the 5 families in New York City are actually still active today, but they're much less powerful than they were in the mid-1900s. The mafia's power decline started in 1970 when the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or the RICO Act, was enacted in the United States. Under the RICO Act, a person who had committed at least 2 acts of racketeering activity from a list of 35 separate crimes, 27 which are federal and 8 of them are state crimes. And if they did any 2 or more of these in a 10-year period, they could be charged with racketeering. And anyone who was guilty of racketeering could be fined up to $25,000, and they were sentenced to 20 years in prison per racketeering count. So if they were given 5 racketeering counts, they would get 100 years in prison.
Damn.
Yeah.
That is a lot.
Yeah. So in addition, the racketeer has to forfeit everything that they had gained from racketeering, and any interest. Yeah, and they had to forfeit any interest in any businesses that they gained through their pattern of racketeering. So naturally, this stopped a lot of it deferred a lot of people from not doing racketeering activities. Obviously, there's still some out there, the people who don't care as much about the consequences, but it died down a lot in the 70s. And so 3 heads of the 5 families were sentenced to 100 years in prison in January of 1987. And the 3 families that were the most affected by the enactment of the RICO Act were the Genovese, Colombo, and the Gambino crime families. The specific one that I'm going to talk about today is the Gambino crime families. Specifically...
I think that's like the more well-known of them.
Yes.
I definitely recognize that name.
Yeah, the Gambino and the Lucchese families like kind of swapped people a little bit. So they were kind of the more prevalent ones that were more prolific, what it seemed like in my research. So specifically with the Gambinos, I specifically focused on a guy named Nino. His case ended up being one of the more prolific ones because it changed the way that people were treated in prisons in New York City. So I'm talking mostly about Nino Gaggi, who was born Antonino Frank Gaggi, also mostly known as Nino. And he was born on August 7th, 1925 in New York City to Angelo and Mary Gaggi. He was the youngest of 3 siblings. His sister was named Marie, and his brother was called Rosario, but he was known as Roy. Nino's father, Angelo, emigrated to the United States from Palermo, Sicily, Italy, where he ran a barber shop in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and Mary worked as a seamstress until Nino was born. Once Nino was born, she stayed home and looked after all 3 kids. So Nino dropped out of school when he was in the 8th grade, and he followed his father into the barber business, and he earned a little extra money on the side by delivering flowers, and he used that money mostly to gamble. And it was around this time that Nino learned how to profit highly on loan sharking to gamblers. So in his early teenage years, the Gaggi family moved to New Jersey after purchasing a small farm. I couldn't find why they moved out of the city, but they did.
Trying to like lay low for whatever reason. Like, I just wanted to lay low for a little bit.
Well, at this time though, like his family, other than him, wasn't involved in organized crime that I could see.
Oh,
so
okay.
like,
That's definitely weird.
because they weren't involved in the Gambino family at this point yet. So they moved to New Jersey, and then eventually they moved back to New York, but they weren't in that family yet. Like extended families of theirs was, but what I could tell, like his parents and his sister and his brother wasn't a part of it. So I don't know what exactly was happening there. But when Nino turned 17 in 1942, during World War II, he attempted to join the U.S. Army, but he was rejected because he had myopia, which is nearsightedness. So, seeing as he would need glasses, he wasn't able to enlist. And then in 1943, the whole Gaggi family moved back to New York in the Bath Beach area. After returning to New York, Nino decided to pursue criminal activities. He ended up contacting his father's cousin, Frank Scalise, which was a founding member of the Gambino crime family. So that's why I was saying like his extended family was involved, but his direct family wasn't. So like they could have left to stay low, but then it wouldn't make sense why they moved back, but I don't know. So his uncle helped get Nino a job on a truck dock where he quickly moved up to supervisor. And then his uncle eventually allowed him to become a ghost employee, so someone who didn't have to work but still got paid. As a ghost employee, Nino devoted his time to loan sharking in the Brooklyn bars and pool halls, and it actually allowed him to report legitimate taxable income to the IRS, and therefore he was able to avoid prosecution for tax evasion. So now just talking about kind of before he officially joined the Gambino crime family. In 1947, Nino's sister Marie gave birth to Dominic Montiglo, Mary's husband at the time, and her son Dominic's father was a boxer and delivery man. His name was Anthony Santamaria. And although Santamaria was the father and husband, Nino was the dominant personality in their household, and it actually resulted in Santamaria's estrangement from his own family, and Dominic viewed Nino as his surrogate father. And then when Dominic grew up, he joined Nino in criminal activities, and he actually was kind of like Nino's kryptonite because he's eventually the reason why he ends up in prison. In 1954, Nino was charged with running an international auto theft ring, which was operating out of a used car lot in Brooklyn. The ring was backed by Scalise, who was his uncle. Yeah, right. Who at the time was the Gambino boss. For 2 years, Nino and two associates of the family fabricated false vehicle registrations for non-existent Cadillacs. Then the gang stole cars that matched the phony vehicle descriptions, replaced their original VIN numbers, and gave them new license plates, and then they would sell them to people in Florida, Georgia, Texas, and Mexico. And then in 1955, Nino got married while his car theft trial was actually underway. During the trial, witnesses, quote unquote, forgot their testimonies on the witness stand, and Nino's co-defendants yeah. And Nino's co-defendants refused to testify against him, so he was acquitted in 1956. Which we all know why they, quote unquote, forgot.
Yeah.
Also, it never said who his, like, the names or anything of his wife and child, so I think it was purposely kept out of press, I think.
Probably to protect them.
Yeah. Later in 1956, Nino became a father, and his wife and child lived on the first floor of the 3-story Gaggi house. In 1957, the leadership in the Gambino family changed drastically. There was like 2 or 3 different leaders in this time. People kept getting killed. In June, Scalise was shot and killed at a fruit stand in the Bronx. In October, the new Gambino boss, Albert Anastasio, was shot and died in a barber's chair at a Manhattan hotel. After the death of Anastasio, Nino ordered his family to stay home for a few days. Naturally, because clearly people are picking them off. And then Nino's close associate, Carlo Gambino, which is why the Gambino family was called the Gambino family, was mostly because this is when they became the most popular. So Carlo Gambino was Anastasia's underboss. He became the new boss after Anastasia's death, and he appointed Capo regime, which everyone knows them as Capos now, which is the underboss's right hand. He anointed that position to Aniello della Croce, which was an Anastasia loyalist. And as the underboss, it gave him control over the Manhattan faction of the family. And then in October 1960, Nino committed his first murder for the Gambino family. He was on a hit squad that murdered mobster Vincent Squillante, who was suspected of killing Scalise, which was the old boss. According to Nino's nephew Dominic, Nino described the murder, noting that they described Squillante in the Bronx, shot him in the head, stuffed him in the trunk, and they dumped him for good. And in this case, dumping him for good meant hauling the body to a basement of a building, loading it into a trash incinerator, and cremating it. And then it was right after this murder that Nino was officially inducted into the Gambino family. Yeah.
I didn't realize like how much history was behind like that whole family. I mean, obviously, like it makes sense, but it's like, dang.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot more to it than I like have like heard about.
Yeah, and like
we're just getting started.
Yeah, and like the you think of like all of the mobs and stuff, like because everyone remember like the kinds of mobs that like I remember, obviously the Russian mafias, the Irish mobs, and the Italian mobs are pretty much the 3 most like prolific groups of mobs out there. And like especially during the 50s and the 60s, like I'm surprised that I could find as much information on them as I did, because like it is like, since it's a criminal thing, like you would think it's a lot more under wraps than it is.
I mean, it's the States though, like nothing's really that under wraps in the States. Like if it was Canada, then that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, it's true. But like even online, like you can see who the leader of each mob faction is at this exact moment.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, like it's weird. It's weird how like you can find out who is the mob leader at that time. It's really, really weird. But by the mid 1960s, Nino had a large clientele of loan shark customers, and he was a silent partner in many businesses. He started to dominate the organized crime world. To increase his earnings, he partnered with fellow mobster Roy DeMeo, who was running a stolen car ring as well. He was operating it in the Flatlands and Carnacy neighborhoods of Brooklyn. And at the time, DeMeo had connections with the Lucchese crime family, like I said earlier. However, Nino persuaded DeMeo to leave the Lucchese's and work for the Gambinos instead. So Nino and DeMeo started making co-loans to loan shark customers, and by 1970, DeMeo was officially working for Nino and was paying him weekly tributes. Nino and DeMeo forced a partnership with a company that illegally processed X-rated films. After law enforcement raided the company in 1973, the owner, Paul Rothenberg, began cooperating with the police and telling them everything about Nino and DeMeo. Nino ordered DeMeo to murder Rothenberg, whose body was found shortly thereafter with bullet wounds. And this murder was first of many murders committed by the DeMeo crew. And while Nino wasn't involved in most of them, he did participate in some. DeMeo and Nino shot and killed Vincent Governara, a young man with no mob ties, but he and Nino had a fight 12 years prior, so it resulted in his demise. In 1976, DeMeo killed George Byram, who had tipped off thieves who attempted to burglarize Nino's Florida vacation home without knowing that Nino and his wife were present. And under Nino's direction, DeMeo shot and killed Byram in a Miami hotel room while Nino and another mobster, Tony Plate, attempted to dismember the body. They were interrupted by a construction crew that was repairing a faulty air conditioning unit, causing them to flee. The body was later found by the motel's housekeeping staff, which that would have been horrible to find.
Yeah, I know somebody like who worked in housekeeping who found a body. Not definitely, probably not to that extent, but still, no.
Yeah, well, apparently in one of the old hotels I worked at, like apparently one of the housekeepers like walked in and they saw like a dead body because they killed themselves.
Oh, that's exactly what I'm talking about. She used to work there.
Yeah. And I was like,
she has like the worst luck. Like, so that girl, that housekeeper, has the absolute worst luck because I used to work with her at my job, like when I worked retail, and we worked in the sports department, and the first ever firearm that she sold somebody, the next day the person went and used it to take their own life. So she has absolute awful luck with like her work in suicide. Like,
jeez.
Oh, I feel so awful for her. She's like traumatized to this day. I see her like regularly because like her stepkids play hockey. But like, yeah, she like has a bad luck magnet. Like when it comes to people and suicides and work, like she's traumatized for life. Like has PTSD.
I don't blame her.
From both of those events.
Yeah. I would never work again. I'd be like, absolutely not.
She was off for like a long while after the hotel one.
I don't blame her.
Yeah, me either. Now she's trying to work an office job. I don't blame her.
Yeah, I don't blame her at all.
Yeah.
So, in late 1976, boss Carlo Gambino died of natural causes. But before his death, he designated Paul Castellano, his brother-in-law, to head the Brooklyn, who was the head of the family's Brooklyn faction. He was now the new boss. However, the Manhattan faction favored Della Croce, which was the underboss to Gambino. So they held a leadership meeting at Nino's house, and it was agreed that Castellano would become the new boss, while Della Croce was the underboss. Nino was eventually promoted to Capo of Castellano's old crew, and Nino remained close to Castellano, hoping to eventually be promoted to underboss. Nino proposed that DeMeo be admitted into the family, but Castellano hesitated because he felt that DeMeo was too violent and was uncontrollable. But in the summer of 1977, Castellano relented and allowed DeMeo into the family. During this time, DeMeo formed an alliance between the Gambino family and the Westies, who were a gang of Irish-American criminals that dominated the west side of downtown Manhattan, also known as Hell's Kitchen, which... it's not Hell's Kitchen, the TV show.
Not Gordon Ramsay? Gordon Ramsay has no part in this?
It's not Gordon Ramsay, unfortunately. It is just that part of Manhattan. I don't know why it's called Hell's Kitchen. Like, I went to the couple a Wikipedia page on it, but I was reading it, but I wasn't like actually taking it in. So like I couldn't tell you why it's actually called Hell's Kitchen. Just that it is. So but
Sure.
I mean, Gordon Ramsay would have shut that shit down, to be fair.
Yeah. Would not have approved.
He'd be like, you can't do this, you know? So
he definitely would have said it in a different tone and level than that, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm not gonna scream and hurt all the people out there possibly listening on headphones. But DeMeo continued to expand his illegal activities. He was passing more and more money over to Nino as time went on, and Nino was also expanding his loan sharking business, and he received a large loan from his nephew Dominic, who was officially a Gambino associate. On June 7th, 1978, Nino and 9 other mobsters were charged with racketeering, conspiracy, and fraud charges as a result of a year-long federal investigation into the bankruptcy of a theater in New York City. The majority of the evidence in the case actually came from wiretapped conversations, but fortunately for Nino, he never said anything incriminating, so he was actually cleared of all charges in December of 1978. So he's a smart cookie, not saying anything. By 1979, DeMeo was involved in loan sharking, murder for hire, and the operation of an auto theft ring that shipped cars to the Middle East. And Nino received a large percentage of profits from these activities, along with money from DeMeo's drug trafficking. The DeMeo crew sold cocaine, marijuana, a variety of pills in large amounts, and he continued his drug trade despite a public prohibition that Castellano had made against this type of racketeering. A Gambino Capo, because in every underboss has like multiple capos that are responsible for their own crew, right? So another Gambino Capo named James Ippolito told Castellano that Nino and DeMeo were trafficking drugs and claimed that DeMeo had cheated Ippolito's son, a Gambino Soldato, which is the lowest mob associate you can be. Like you're very, very low in the hierarchy. But James said that his son was cheated in a drug deal. And then he also told Castellano that Nino was a police informant, even though there's no evidence to say that he was. So Ippolito, for these reasons, asked Castellano for permission to murder Nino and DeMeo, but Castellano...
Like he has permission to murder him?
Well, because he's a capo trying to kill another capo, right? Like... In the end, like
the fact that he asked permission is kind of fun. Is like the irony behind everything.
Yeah. And then Castellano, even though it was his rules to not be involved in any sort of drug trafficking, he broke his own rules and sided with Nino and DeMeo. And then he actually gave Nino and DeMeo permission to murder both Ippolito and his son. So Ippolito very clearly didn't understand the term of snitches get stitches.
It's probably after their time that came about.
Yeah, probably. Maybe this is what sparked it, you know? Like
maybe that's exactly where it came from.
Because that's all I can think about. But on October 1st, 1979, Nino and DeMeo shot and killed both Ippolitos. However, a witness alerted an off-duty police officer who soon found Nino walking away from the crime scene. DeMeo had gone in a different direction, so he was not caught. After a brief shootout with the police officer wounded Nino in the neck and arrested him. And even though he was very clearly tied to the Ippolito murders, and he also attempted murder of the police officer, Nino was only convicted of assault, and he was sentenced to 5 to 15 years in federal prison. Yeah.
My brains.
And while Nino was
probably paying off the police officers.
Probably. And while Nino was in prison awaiting trial, DeMeo became acting capo of Nino's crew. In 1981, Nino's sentence was overturned on appeal, and he was released from prison. and it is highly suspected that Nino had bribed a juror to make false claims of government misconduct during the trial, which led to him getting his appeal. So
I wish they could see like our reactions right now.
I know. It's like I can't, like, because I've finally finished, like, I'm finally caught up on Quantico, but what they were going through, like, the entire third season thus far, like, it just makes me think of that. Because, like, you have ties everywhere, you know, like, especially when you're like, the mob was running New York City during this time, like, so
I mean, the mob like more than likely still runs New York City, like, let's be real.
Well, yeah, like, I mean, there's tons of mobs out there, and, like, especially, like, in towns that are super highly dominant on any of the nationalities and stuff like that in those specific areas. Like, Manhattan is still very, and, like, New York City is still very highly Italian populated, and same with, like, Irish communities that are, like, very, very Irish. A lot of the Irish mobs still run those, you know, like,
yeah,
you're still gonna have that, and all of these families still are operating today. What they're doing, couldn't tell you, and I don't want to know, you know, like, get it out of my face enough. Like, I don't really want to be involved in that, but, like, they can do whatever they want, you know, like, they're the mob at this time, like,
yeah.
But so now we're getting into Nino's nephew Dominic being the second person to not understand snitches get stitches. This is where a lot of the mob, like, because the RICO Act was now in effect, so a lot of people started doing things to cover their own ass. You see a lot more of these guys, like these capos and everything like that, being informants. So there's a lot more people being arrested, like, more frequently. So after Nino's release, his nephew Dominic became a drug addict, and he actually fled New York City for a fear of punishment from the Gambino family. But this isn't the last we see or hear from Dominic. He comes back later. The FBI dismantled DeMeo's auto theft ring and sent 2 crew members to prison. And then in 1980, a third crew member, Vito Arena, became a government witness. In 1982, Arena began testifying about crimes committed by Nino and the DeMeo crew. As the investigation intensified, Castellano became highly concerned about DeMeo cooperating with authorities if he were ever arrested. So on January 20th, 1983, on January 20th, 1983, DeMeo's body was found nearly frozen in the trunk of his car. And his killer was never identified by law enforcement, but they theorized that Castellano ordered one of his associates to kill him. Whether it was Nino or one of the other crew members or any of DeMeo's crew is unseen. You know, but I mean, if the mob is worried about one of their own people snitching, pop, you know?
Yep.
Like,
even if it's not true, we're not taking that risk. But
they've already had their fair share of snitches. They don't need more. So. Yep.
And none of them want stitches, so.
Yeah, exactly. DeMeo was blindsided, clearly. But after DeMeo's murder, Dominic returned to NYC to collect an old loan shark debt, and he was arrested. To avoid persecution, he started cooperating with the government, providing information on Nino and the DeMeo crew. Dominic's information led to the indictments of both Nino and Castellano, and by early 1984, some of the DeMeo crew members were arrested. One of them, Richard Denome, was later murdered on February 4th, 1984, and it was the same thing with Denome as it was for DeMeo, where his killers were never identified, but law enforcement assumed it was killed by some of the remaining crew members. Denome's brother, Frederick Denome, also suspected the crew of killing Richard and agreed to become a government witness as well. So this is where we see the huge snowball happening of everyone trying to cover their own ass.
Yeah. Also, I just looked it up. Apparently, Snitches Get Stitches was really like popularized in the 90s, so much later on.
Okay, much later on, but still only 10 years after all of this shenanigans of witnesses and all that coming about.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
So, yeah. And then on February 25th, 1984, Nino was indicted on multiple charges of racketeering and murder, and Castellano was indicted the following month. And due to the everlasting amount of charges against both men, the court decided to split the numerous charges into two groups, two different trials. So the first trial was dealing with the auto theft ring and the 5 related murders to the auto theft ring. The first trial began in October of 1985, and it saw testimony from Irina, Denome, and Dominic. And in December of 1985, midway through the first trial, Castellano was shot to death at the Spark Steakhouse in Manhattan, and this was ordered from Capo John Gotti. So, one of the capos took out the boss. With Castellano's death, Nino became the lead defendant in the first trial, and Gotti quickly assumed control of the family. In March 1986, Nino was convicted of conspiracy to sell stolen cars and was sentenced to 5 years in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, which was a penitentiary for male inmates, and it was located in Pennsylvania. In 1988, Nino was transferred from Lewisburg to the Metropolitan Correctional Center located near the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, and he was moved there awaiting his second trial. And as of August 26, 2021, actually, the Metropolitan Correctional Center actually was temporarily closed because it was deteriorating. So they had to move all prisoners, which was over 200 male prisoners, to different locations.
Sounds like OCDC, they're talking about creating, like, rebuilding a new Supermax facility because it is, like, literally falling to pieces and it's overcrowded.
Yeah, this one, since it's so close to the courthouse too, like, they have people coming in and out and stuff, and, like, they have, like, quite a few of, like, really high level, like, criminals there, especially during, like, where the mob ran everything.
Yeah, like, it's definitely one that has, like, a lot of high max people here in Canada because, like, until they go to trial and stuff, but, like, a lot of, like, big names have been there, especially after, like, the closing of Kingston Pen.
True.
So,
there's yeah, and then the second trial had a focus on Nino's racketeering acts and on the 25 murders allegedly committed by the DeMeo crew. The second trial didn't ever happen because on April 17th, 1988, Nino died of a heart attack. And Nino had actually told a guard that he was suffering from chest pain, but the guard didn't do anything. Which, like, some people as well, like, with the mob running everything, this guard could have been a guard of a different family, like, paid off by a different family too, who doesn't care, you know? Like, yeah, like, you never know. Or the guard was like, well, I don't believe that you have chest pain. I think you're just trying to do whatever to not be in prison. Like, there's a whole bunch of reasons why a guard wouldn't, like, that I could think of why a guard wouldn't do anything. But regardless, this was highly controversial, highly criticized, because it was widely speculated that Nino might have survived the heart attack if prison personnel had actually acted sooner and sent him to the hospital. And Nino's wife actually sued the prison system for negligence, and she was successful due to the assisted testimony from other inmates that were also receiving poor treatment. Nino's death sparked a controversy that eventually resulted in better medical conditions in New York prisons. And that was kind of like the whole story of Nino Gaggi. He, like, there was information about everything that he's done, but not to the extent of, like, knowing, like, numbers or anything like that. Because, again, being in a criminal family, like, you're just gonna know what the police report said.
Yeah.
But I did want to talk a little bit about the people who took over after Castellano was killed.
Okay.
So the capo that organized for Castellano to be killed was John Gotti. When John Gotti took over, he was actually imprisoned only a few years later due to the activity, racketeering activity that they did. He died in 2002. Didn't really say what it was from, but then his brother took over for him in 1999 because he was kind of in and out. And then he was eventually imprisoned in 2002, died in 2021. So he died recently. And then they didn't officially promote anybody until 2011, which is the new boss. I'm not going to say his name because I don't want that juju. They've changed a lot, obviously, because, I mean, people get killed all the time, very clearly.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of like looking it up. Their current boss is between the age of 75 and 76 years old.
All
that is crazy. I mean, obviously, like, would have been a lot younger, like, when was appointed in 2011, but, like, yikes, yeah.
Yeah, and, literally, like, well, so the boss that they have now, like, they've had people acting as the boss as well, so I don't know if he is just, like, not doing well or whatever, but he was, like, at the height of Nino being, like, a really prolific capo, this guy was, like, just born. The guy that's in power now. He's also known as Greaseball. I think that's funny. Yeah, it's weird to think that, like, the person, like, somebody that's, like, Nana's age is, still a boss, like, leader.
Running, yeah.
Really,
like, there's somebody, like, that, there's somebody, like, under him, but, like, he's, like, the front boss kind of thing, but...
Yeah. They killed the, you know how I said that Arena was testifying? They ended up killing him in January of 1996. He and Thomas Marengo were killed with a hail of 40 bullets that were fired into their car in Brooklyn. Arena was targeted because he was suspected of killing a Gambino associate, muscling in on rival crew's turf, and festering a dispute between the two families purposefully. And then Marengo was just an innocent bystander in the wrong place at the wrong time. Poor guy. But yeah, I think, like, what really drew me to this case was, like, probably one of my favorite movies of all time. It's called Johnny Dangerously. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I don't know. I've seen, like, a lot about this family. Like, I've seen a lot of things, but I'm not sure if I've seen that one. It sounds familiar, but...
I love this movie. My dad used to, like, rave about it all the time, and then I watched it for the first time when I was, like, 16. But it's a comedy where I don't know, like, it was roughly around this time because it was, like, around Al Capone, like, that kind of time. And the lead guy, Johnny, he, like, his family grew up dirt poor, and so they had no money. And then he was a newspaper delivery boy, and the mob was going in and out of this bar, and they needed somebody to go in and, like, deliver a message to a rival mob's leader that was in there. And so they had him do it because they wouldn't, like, suspect it from, like, a child, you know? So then he went in there and did it, and ended up, like, sticking with the crew that asked him to deliver the message. And he, like, grew all the way up to being, like, the mob boss. And, like, his little brother ended up becoming a lawyer, and then that lawyer, like, his brother was, like, trying to, like, track down who the leader of this boss was to, like, get him arrested. And, like, it was, like, it's such an interesting film for a comedy. But it has, like, some really good lines. Like, the leader of the rival boss is so funny because he has, like, the weirdest, like, accent or whatever, but he just goes it's like, because the guy, like, the actor was definitely, like, he was Indian or some sort of Middle Eastern nationality or something. but he was also in New York, so it was like a blend between like a Middle Eastern accent with a with a New York accent. And he was like in court, and he's like, I just want to let you know that you Farjanized holes like yourselves would never be able to be in the same like level as a upstanding citizen like me. And I'm like, oh my god, stop.
An upstanding citizen like you.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was just so funny. Like, I think it's definitely like my number one favorite movie of all time.
That's crazy. That's funny.
Right?
I'll have to watch it. I'll have to check it out.
Let me just see. Because like there were a couple movies about Nino Gaggi in general, and there was some media stuff. So his nephew, Mr. Snitch, provided writers Jerry Capecci and Gene Mustaine information on Gaggi and the DeMeo crew for their book called Murder Machine. The book and the television documentaries, Dominic blamed his criminal actions on Gaggi's bad influence. So he blamed it all on his uncle Nino for influencing to be a horrible, horrible criminal. Which is like, okay, a way to blame the person who's dead, I guess.
Yeah.
There was also a made-for-television film called Boss of Bosses, and Nino was played by Philip Williams in the 2001 movie. And then another movie named The Iceman. There was a fictionalized version of Nino named Leo Marks, who was played by Robert Davi. And he was a high-ranking member in the Gambino family and was killed by Richard Kuklinski. And then there was also a movie called Inside Man with Nino being played by Robert Davi as well. So I guess it was two movies by the same one. And it was played by the same actor. And according to Nino's family and the child, I don't even know if it's a son or a daughter, like it never even said that. But apparently Nino's family said that the character Tony Soprano was reported to bear a too similar to discount resemblance to Nino. But, yeah. So, and there were also some other books other than Murder Machine, which was For the Sins of My Father, A Mafia Killer, His Son, and the Legacy of a Mob Life, which was written by the son of DeMeo. So he wrote his own book about the mafia and the situation, everything like that too. But yeah, so my story was kind of short. Like, I guess like my case was kind of shorter than I was anticipating. But
yeah, that actually was a little bit shorter than I was kind of expecting, not gonna lie.
Yeah, well, because like there was a lot of like, oh, this person did this and this person did that and this person did this and this person did that. Like it's almost like a blame game. That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
So like it was like I didn't even like really get into anything with the trials and stuff because like eventually you didn't even get to do his second trial.
You could literally like go on forever though, like about trials pertaining to this.
Well, that's the thing. Like, there's so many. Like, I had to cut out, even though like it was short, I cut out a lot of people. Like, I could have talked about, like, especially if you're only talking about one specific person in a crime family, like it cuts it down a lot. Like, if I talked about the entire like history of the Gambino family, it would take forever.
Yeah, like we literally could be here for days, honestly.
Yeah, because like like that, like these families, as far as their written history goes, is like the 1900s, like the beginning of the 1900s. So I only went from the major like local war of in New York City in the 1920s and went after that. Like I didn't like talk about anything that started the war of the 1920s that resulted in the five families. Because it would have taken forever. It would have taken forever to do the entire Gambino family, let alone all five families. But I wanted to just put a tidbit of the five families.
Yeah. So quick question.
Yeah.
So somebody asked me to ask you, and I don't know. I was just looking up on our Google Docs. It is. I noticed it's on your list of things to cover. But they asked me if you knew anything about the. Where is the name of it? Where is that?
We're including Q&As now.
Wendigo.
Oh, the Wendigos. Yeah. Yep. The Wendigos are these horrible creatures that live in the woods. And they're like half human, half supernatural animal being, whatever. Because they're human in like in the way that they're built, but they're like they have really long fingers and fingernails, and they're like huge, like they're super tall.
Okay.
And like they like the way that they live, I guess, is like they hibernate for a long time and then they eat humans, like they eat human flesh. And like
okay, we'll leave it at that, and then we'll get
like
to it.
I do know what they are. They're probably one of the most fascinating supernatural creatures to me, because
fair enough.
It also has like some psychological roots in its history that people believe could be the reasons for them even being a thing in the first place. So like I'll talk about that next time I have a solo case episode. Because like I did want to do like a supernatural crime too, but I was just like, maybe I'll do something that's not like directly like a homicide related case.
Yeah.
I've been kind of straying from that because I did terrorist last time, but
that's what my next case is on.
A terrorist attack?
Yeah.
Nice.
So I do also want to just kind of like throw it out there. We did have a case request that came in that we are working on, hopefully getting that episode recorded and done fairly soon. We are working on it. We haven't forgotten. It's just been crazy busy, so hopefully we'll get to that one. Maybe I'll do that one after my next one that we have planned.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so it seems like we have a good new schedule-ish going, seeing as we're not really following the last one.
I mean, it was just kind of like a kind of something to kickstart us and kind of like motivate us to get it started.
Yeah, that's very true.
It was kind of, as we go, and kind of sometimes you're just like, not really vibing with that. Like, kind of want to talk about this a little bit more, or something else comes up. So, we will get to it. I know it's been a while. Obviously, our recording schedule has kind of been pretty chaotic with you going back to school and with me taking a different position at work. So it's been a little bit hectic, but
yeah. And then also with us changing our format, like it seems like when we do want to talk about a case, it's like 2 weeks ahead of time now. Like now that we're doing one case per episode, like it makes it even more like extended. Like next time I talk about Wendigos, now it's not going to be until 2 weeks or something if I do cover it next. It's now it's a little different. My friend requested for me to do 2 different cases, and they're really big cases, so like they're gonna have a lot of information on them. So like that's gonna be like in the future, like not in the next few weeks future. Like it's gonna take me
in the foreseeable future.
Like it's not, they're not simple cases. They're very like there's so much information on them. So like, and one of them has kind of had a recent development in it. So it's been like, so
kind of still hard. Like an active case almost. Yeah, I have a case that I want to cover.
But yeah.
Yeah, I have a case that I want to cover that I know is probably going to take me weeks to do the notes for, and it's honestly, even at being a solo episode, it's probably going to be pretty close to an hour and a half, 2-hour episode. I'm not going to lie. Like, there's just so much, and like, there's a book that they wrote on this crime and this kind of story, and then the book itself is over 700 pages.
Wow.
And I crushed that book in like 3 days because like I'm so invested in this case. Again, like it's the same case we talked about last episode. Super recent, like happened during COVID. But yeah, like it's just one that's gonna take me forever to prepare for, and then um, because I'm so passionate about it, like it's gonna be very detailed. So probably won't be for the foreseeable future here, but I'll definitely be starting to work on the notes for that. Um, but it won't be anytime soon. It won't be coming out anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, like that's just the way that the wind blows. Like it's especially for the really really big cases where there's a lot of information. You need to go over all the information. What do you want to say? What do you not? You have to
Well,
compile it and
yeah, and so like this one that I'm talking about, like there is so much information. There's so many details. There's so much that's been released to the public. Um, and it's a Canadian case actually. So it's like one where we'll get like a lot of detail, which is very unusual. So, um, but
mm-hmm.
I'm really excited about it. So
Yeah, it's very uncommon. Like it's very abnormal to have a lot of
yeah,
information coming from a. It's like a
yeah,
contradiction in Canadian cases. It feels like so.
yeah. Once you know, like once you know the case, you'll be like, oh, okay, like it makes sense. But yeah.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Worst Case Macchiato. It was episode 16. Please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts as well as the other podcast platforms that we have, as well as give us a follow on Spotify. It really helps us a lot. If you ever want to get in contact with us to tell us about a case, or to just let us know of any updates about any of the cases as well, or you just want to give us a shout out about anything that you have in relation to any cases at all, or any personal experiences, you can email us at worstcasemacchiato@gmail.com, or you can DM us on Instagram or TikTok at worstcasemacchiato. And like always, we'll see you next time. Bye!
Bye.